All right.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on Friday. And this is our environmental justice guest lecture and speaker series entitled We Are Not Immigrant, Unsettling Asians in America. So this speaker series were initiated by the Amado Kaya Initiative, and the Amado Kaya Initiative is a BIPOC-led project which advances the commitments of late social justice activist and community organizer Amado Kaya Kenham Rodriguez, who died at 22 in 2020 after supporting an indigenous group in the Philippines suffering from losses due to typhoons. AKI continues its legacy by disseminating indigenous land-based decolonial knowledge and promoting individual and collective healing, transformation, and liberation. So this guest lecture series is hosted by the Amado Kaya Initiative in collaboration with the Asian American Seed Stewards at UC Davis, which I am part of. And the title of our lecture series, We Are Not Immigrants, Unsettling Asians in America, is inspired both by Hawaiian sovereignty activist and professor of Hawaiian studies, Haunai Kai Task's poem, Settler Not Immigrants, as well as Native American studies scholar Roxanne Dunbar Orritt's book, Not a Nation of Immigrants. This series hosts lectures and conversations with Asian American and other scholars and activists of color who write about or are actively resisting white settler colonialism in California and beyond through work with indigenous communities, environmental justice, and or land stewardship. And it also holds space for Asian American identified folks, the main audiences for AKI, as well as the Asian American sisters, to listen and learn from indigenous peoples, to encourage us to challenge and resist our complicities with white settler colonialism as residents on Turtle Island. Our series will run from April to June this year with specific dates and speakers information to be announced peri- periodically. Sorry. So please follow us on Instagram, Amadokaya, and subscribe to our newsletter at amadokaya.org to stay updated. And the recordings of these talks, as well as podcast interviews, will be uploaded as well. So please stay connected. And if you like this series and want more, please consider supporting us by donating. Donations allow us unrestricted funding to continue our programming in environmental justice, indigenous solidarity, and more, especially right now. So I'm very honored and excited to introduce today's speaker. So Dr. Heidi Amin-Hong will give a talk entitled Unsettling National Parks, Settler Colonialism, and Asian American Land Relations. Dr. Heidi Amin-Hong is an assistant professor of English at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Her research and teaching focus on Asian American and Pacific Islander cultural studies and the effects of war, colonialism, and global capitalism on AAPI environments. She is working on a book that considers how Asian American writers and artists can contribute to healing damaged environments in the afterlives of the Cold War. So please welcome Professor Heidi Amin-Hong with a big round of applause.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chung, for that lovely introduction. I'm going to share my slides now. Please let me know if you can see and and hear me okay. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to be here in this space. I wanted to thank the Amano Kaya Initiative and Anna in particular for organizing this event and for including me in the speaker series. I am so excited to be in conversation with all the other scholars and organizers who are actively working toward environmental justice and solidarity with Indigenous sovereignty movements. And I especially love this theme that is drawn from Dr. Hawani K. Trust's work as well, to push against narratives about Asian American assimilation and inclusion. So, my talk today draws from an archive that I assembled of Asian American literature and culture about national parks to focus on two environments in particular that have been significant for Asian diasporic and Native communities in California: Yosemite National Park and Manzanar, the site of the first Japanese American incarceration camp during World War II. So, my talk title has shifted a little bit, but is still generally the same: Unsettling National Parks and Public Lands, Asian Indigenous Land Relations. So just to give a brief overview of the roadmap of my talk today, I'll be introducing the framework for my talk and the two sites of Yosemite and Manzanar. And then I'll go into a bit of the historical background on Native and Chinese American Yosemite, as well as why the national parks have been so important to Asian American literary and visual cultures. And then finally, in the second half of my talk, I'll be giving a bit of a demonstration of how I've been teaching conversations around Asian and Indigenous forced displacement through the film Manzanar Diverted. So, um, the Asian American artists and writers that I reference here are grappling with questions of Asian American immigrant belonging in American landscapes. Some of them are embracing outdoor recreation and visibility in national parks and other public lands as a symbol of belonging and a path to a conservationalist identity that has historically excluded people of color from this vision of pristine wilderness. And yet, the creative work that I focus on today by artists and writers are also critiquing immigrant desires to assimilate into a nation an environmentalist vision that is built on genocide, exclusion, and occupation. So I will demonstrate how teaching Asian American literature and film can offer new ways for Asian Americans to understand our place in these occupied lands, such as Yosemite and the Owens Valley, as sites of ongoing Southern colonial violence that has historically impacted Asian and Native communities in distinct yet interrelated ways. So I wanted to share this quote that is a critique of this idea of uninhabited wilderness by William Cronin, who is an environmental historian. So Cronin makes this argument that settler colonialism, through these investments in land and native dispossession, enabled the construction of Yosemite as a, quote, uninhabited wilderness. But of course, we know that Yosemite Valley was never uninhabited. It's been inhabited and taken care of by indigenous peoples for 5,500 years. So the Southern Sierra Miwok, Mono, and Paiute people have all lived in the valley for thousands and thousands of years. Of course, we know that Yosemite National Park was founded on the displacement and removal of Native peoples, making the park into what Ojibwe author David Schuer has called a crime scene. So today, most of my references to Indigenous community initiatives will be kind of recent, just to give a sense of what is happening now and what the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation are still organizing for. So here you can see from this flyer that the Southern Sierra Miwok Nation is actively organizing for federal recognition, which the nation still does not have. And groups like the Wahoga Committee, which organizes across 7 affiliated tribes, continue to work toward rebuilding Wahoga Village in Yosemite as a center for tribal education, heritage, and co-governance, which has included lobbying for funding from sources like the Yosemite Conservancy to restore and rebuild Wahoga Village as the last native village that was destroyed in 1969 by the National Park Service. So this was also the year where the National Park Service evicted the last native residents from the valley. And here there's this group organizes outdoor education walks and various events to bring community members into recognizing this act of violence. So also in Owens Valley, just east of the Sierras, LA Department of Water and Power has radically transformed Owens Valley into an arid desert through diverting water into the LA Aqueduct to support the growing city of Los Angeles in the early 20th century. From 1942 to 1945, Owens Valley became the site of the first Japanese American incarceration camp at Manzanar. I placed Yosemite and Manzanar together to show that neither is an exceptional example of environmental conservation or degradation, but actually both environments are produced through similar structures of settler colonialism that enable the preservation of certain environments while making other places available for extraction. And has also contributed to the displacement of both Japanese Americans and the removal of indigenous communities. In this first part of my talk, I'll share some thoughts on why national parks and Yosemite in particular have been so central to Asian American literature and culture. And then just as an aside, I thought that I would share a little bit about myself and how I'm implicated in this project and these feelings and desires toward Yosemite as a place. So this is from obviously some photos from a family vacation of the last time I was in Yosemite, which is in 2022 with my family. And I wanted to share about how I came to this project as a Chinese American immigrant who finds a lot of joy and refuge in visiting national park spaces, and yet am deeply troubled by my complicity as a settler on native land. And as someone who mostly grew up on the East Coast in Maryland or the Chesapeake Bay, known as the lands of the Tawe people, I now live in Southern California on unceded Chumash territory, also known as Santa Barbara. Because I grew up on the East Coast, I did not camp or visit national parks until I became an adult with my family, who at the time, when I was younger, did not have the money or time off work to travel until I was in my 20s. And I wanted to point out how common this experience is as immigrants, particularly East Asian immigrants, become assimilated into a professional class. Many gain access to parks and public lands as these spaces of leisure and experience nature as a reprieve from work that alienates them from land and cultural practices. And as reporter Jay Caspian Kong writes in his memoir about the trajectory of his Korean immigrant parents, quote, "To them, America is national parks and an open pathway to the accumulation of capital." So this observation to me reveals this fundamental logic of national parks as a space that is not separate from capitalist accumulation, but symbolic of it. So then Asian American writers, artists, and park rangers have worked to highlight how Chinese immigrant labor in Yosemite in particular has significantly shaped California's environments and historically made access to Yosemite possible. Much of this work has been led by Ranger Yang Yin Chan, who is a staff member at the Yosemite National Park in collaboration with outdoor recreation enthusiasts. And she's worked to unsurface a robust history of Asian American presence in Yosemite as road builders, cooks, and tour guides. So here, Chan discovered ledgers that show payments to a firm that hired mostly Chinese immigrant laborers to build Wawona Road, which was built in only 4.5 months and was the main road that connected Wawona Hotel to Yosemite Valley in 1875. Ayo, a Chinese immigrant chef, ran the Wawona Hotel's kitchen from 1886 to 1910 and worked there until he was dismissed in 1933. And then I wanted to note on this slide that there's actually very few photos of Chinese workers in Yosemite. Much of what we know is drawn from these images of structures that are remaining or a trace in the archives, such as the ledger, which is the only um, way that researchers can encounter these stories in many ways. So this also speaks to a question about what does it mean to recuperate Asian American presence in the American West when there is so little documented about these communities. And then Tai Sing, who was another chef, was Asian American, born in Nevada to Chinese immigrant parents, and worked as a backcountry cook who was hired for geologists and map makers of the US Geological Survey, and also eventually for Stephen Mather's expeditions to Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks in 1915 and 1916. And here you can see how Taising's story has been recuperated in more recent years through a children's book that tells his story as a mountain chef. And Chinese immigrants also operated a laundry that served Wamona Hotel in the early 1900s. And the recent building, the original building was recently restored and opened to visitors in 2019. So there's really been a resurgence of interest in these stories and places led by Ranger Chan that brings Asian Americans together to learn more about these particular um, deeper histories about Chinese immigration and labor in Yosemite in particular. So, shifting gears a bit, I wanted to share a bit more about how Yosemite and other national parks also play an important role in Asian American literature and art. In Shang Wang's Home Base, published in 1979, the protagonist, Rainsford Chan, describes camping with his family in Yosemite as an avenue to imagine a closeness with his grandfather, who was one of the Chinese workers building railroads in the Sierra Nevada mountains. So here, Yosemite enables Rainsford to, quote, see himself fixed on the land and imagine himself as inheriting this mythical, heroic Chinese American masculine story. More recent fiction by Taiping Chen and Si Pam Zhang are more critical of this violent erasure and commodification of Native peoples, cultures, and environments. Taiping Chen's short story, Land of Big Numbers, describes a friction that emerges between a Chinese immigrant woman and her white boyfriend as they stop by a native craft stand en route to the Grand Canyon. So here in the story, the Grand Canyon becomes a globalized space of immigrant alienation, commerce, and fraught encounters with native presence. And Zhang's novel, which I write about elsewhere, is imagining these emergent kinships between Chinese and native communities through the figure of the father, who was a Chinese orphan raised in a native labor camp, who is later conscripted to manage Chinese railroad workers because of his language skills to act as an in-between translator. This novel, though, does not simply recover Chinese American presence, but also mourns the erasure of Chinese and native stories alongside the destruction of land, buffaloes, rivers, birds, and other forms of human and non-human life. I'd also like to share a few examples of how Asian American visual artists have grappled with the question of Asian visibility and erasure in the American landscape. So here you can see that Japanese American painter Chiura Obata, Chinese American photographer Chen Guangqi, and Vietnamese American artist and photographer Bing Dan have all been drawn to the places we associate the most with American landmarks, Yosemite Falls and the Grand Canyon. So in these images and photographs, they depict these places for their majestic beauty, but also for the histories of exclusion, erasure, and masculine violence that these landscapes carry. Don, in particular, created these daguerreotypes using a technique from the 19th century that would have been used to photograph Yosemite to capture his images on a reflective surface that requires the viewer to reflect on their own place in the land. And Obata, who was painting in the 1930s, used traditional Japanese ink techniques to paint Yosemite in 1927, which is an experience that he would later describe as the greatest harvest for my whole life and future in painting. Obata is a complex figure because he was, of course, later incarcerated at the Topax camp in Utah in 1942, where he produced hundreds of watercolors and drawings of the camp environment and also taught art classes. He's particularly complicated because he was very pro-American and he was actually criticized and attacked by Japanese American dissidents who did not agree with his politics. And his legacy, interestingly, especially when recuperated by Yosemite as an institution, is often discussed as this immigrant appreciation of American environments that embrace beauty and belonging, but ultimately fails to acknowledge settler colonial erasure. So, this is a quote from an article that was written about him as this is his visit to Yosemite and painting the national parks was a way for an immigrant to appreciate the grandeur of a host country they eventually call home. It's also a way for artists to stake a claim, a statement that I live here as well. I'm appreciating the beauty of this place and sharing it through my art. And this is from an article drawn from the Yosemite Conservancy. But of course, this does not acknowledge the history of Japanese American incarceration camps situated on native land or the settler colonial erasure that is the foundational violence creating these national parks. So, in the latter half of my talk, I'd like to share how teaching Asian American literature and culture can promote more nuanced conversations about overlapping Asian Indigenous histories of forced displacement and also inspire Asian Americans to support Native sovereignty movements that are happening now, particularly in Southern California. So, in fall 2023, I taught the documentary Manzanar Diverted When Water Becomes Dust, directed by Anne Koneko. And this was a film about how Japanese American incarceration, Native and local rancher struggles for water rights in Owens Valley intersect with one another. Um, so the film features multiple perspectives from Kathy Jefferson Bancroft, who's a leader of the Lone Pine Paiute Shoshone tribe and works as a historic preservation officer and water monitor at Owens Lake. It also follows Sue Kunitomi Embry, who is the co-chair and founder of the Manzanar Committee and a surviving internee from who was interned at Manzanar, as well as her granddaughter, Monica Embry, who's an environmental justice activist, who in many ways was mobilized to act because of her grandmother's ongoing struggles with asthma from her exposure to dust pollution at Manzanar. We also get the perspectives of Nancy Masters and Mary Roper, who were ranchers and environmentalists who had the Owens Valleys Committee, a watchdog group that kind of keeps LADWP in check. So For the film, I just wanted to show a clip from the trailer so that you can get an idea of the environment of Owens Valley and how these stories are narrated and interwoven with one another. And then I'll go into how I approach teaching this text to my class of undergraduate students.
Stories about things that happen here, but nobody listens. My people, my ancestors, my grandparents have lived on this lake for thousands of years. Outsiders came into this valley and renamed it. We called it Payahunadu, which means the place where the water always flows.
I was evacuated from Los Angeles on May 9th, 1942. We were sent to the Manzanar concentration camp. The period I spent in Manzanar was the most traumatic experience of my life.
Manzanar is 1 square mile of land that has a deep history of forced removal.
Los Angeles bones in the heart of the valley.
They came here for the water. They are trying to recharacterize this valley as always being a desert. What made it such a desert is their pumping.
This was the lake. This was all water before that.
Many people who lived at Manzanar developed upper respiratory breathing problems, like my grandmother.
I just don't have any energy. When I walk a little ways, I get tired real fast.
Not only was water a major factor in the siting of Manzanar, water was also the means of resistance.
This water, our water, it's there for everybody. Natives, non-natives, everybody. Don't take everything. I think we've reached a point in America where we have to look on ourselves as more of a diverse nation.
Okay, hopefully you all were able to hear the video, but if not, thanks so much, Anna, for putting that video link in the chat. So, when I taught this, I solicited questions from my students as a way to frame the conversation around the film. And then I also invited the director and Kaneko to visit my class via Zoom to answer some of the student questions. So the students came up with these questions, and I found that my undergraduate class, which was a large lecture of 150, mostly comprised of students from California, actually had some knowledge, but not a lot of knowledge about the history of Japanese American incarceration. So the students wanted to know, why were Japanese Americans incarcerated at Manzanar, and why were these camps located on tribal lands? How are Japanese American incarceration and indigenous dispossession connected? And finally, what is happening now? What was the impact of more recent droughts and climate change conditions on Owens Valley and the aquifer? How can we make a difference? So to approach these clarifying questions, I discussed with them in lecture a couple of main historical events. To address the first question, I situated the film in the larger context of Japanese American incarceration as a result of Roosevelt's now infamous Executive Order 9066. And students are always kind of shocked to know that, or find out that the executive order did not identify a specific racial group, but still was intended to target and remove Japanese Americans from areas designated important for national security. Of course, the camps where Japanese Americans were incarcerated were isolated, fenced and guarded, selected for their perceived remote locations in deserts of California, Nevada, Wyoming, and Utah, located far away from infrastructures. I also explained that racist beliefs about Japanese Americans' natural success as farmers drove the exploitation of their labor in the camps, as camp workers were expected to grow their own food as field workers in these harsh, arid conditions for very little pay. I pointed out key scenes in the film where Japanese Americans remade Manzanar their home through deliberate changes to shaping the environment and cultivating the environment through farming, growing produce, grain, and hay, and also building Japanese-style gardens and fish ponds which they were able to fill up with water and actually cultivate fish. These traces of camp life remain mostly as hints in the landscape, as most structures were removed after the war. So part of the work of the Manzanar Committee was making sure that these traces of Japanese American incarceration don't get lost. So when visiting Manzanar as a site, they found pipes sticking out of the ground that internees had used as a water faucet, shoe prints of a child who left a prints in the cement, and some stone remains of the gardens and sidewalks that led to where the internees lived. And then to approach the second question of how Japanese American incarceration and indigenous dispossession were connected, I talked about a history of water rights in Owens Valley and the Eastern Sierras through this shared history of Japanese American and Native forced displacement. So contrary to this region's reputation as an arid desert, Owens Valley has always been known by the Paiute and Shoshone people as Payahunandu, or the land of the flowing water. So even though the land received very little rainfall, there was a lot of groundwater present in Owens Lake and other lakes in the region. The history of Paiute removal spanned across the 1800s and 1900s. From 1855 to the 1860s, the Paiute was forced to march on foot over 300 miles, which is still commemorated by the Paiute Run to honor ancestors who were forced to march out of Owens Valley. And this is a scene that you can see in the film as well. The LA Department of Water and Power began to purchase land in the Owens Valley for water rights in the 1900s, from 1905 to the 1930s, and the first LA aqueduct was completed in 1913 to divert water from Owens Valley to Los Angeles to sustain this growing urban population. And in 1939, crucially, the city of LA offered to exchange 1,500 acres of city-owned land for 3,126 acres of federally reserved Indian lands, which would concentrate the Paiute Indian population on 3 new reservations rather than scattered parcels, because LADWP wanted access to that land. Lands offered by the city were highly taxed and did not come with water rights. And Manzanar here, I argue, becomes a site for these shared histories of forced removal, while Japanese Americans were removed from their homes across the West Coast and incarcerated at Manzanar. The Paiute and Shoshone were displaced from Owens Valley, pretty much within the same time frame. So the last question that student asked was, what was the impact of drought and climate change on the aquifer and the environment of Owens Valley, and how can we make a difference today? So the film explains that persistent droughts in the LA area increase stress on the aquifer And in particular, the second aquifer built in 1970 was especially destructive to water table levels, and that resulted in dramatic changes in plant and animal life. Grasses changed to shrubland, and native jackrabbits disappeared, and tribal communities and other residents were all exposed to these dangerous levels of dust and air pollution through dust storms. In 13 years, Mono Lake and Owens Lake were both drained from the LA aquifer. And in 1970, LA took 500,000 acre feet of water per year, which was a massive amount. And that amount has now been cut down to about 230,000 acre feet, which is still kind of massive and difficult to comprehend. And finally, it created the system of reliance where tribal communities are reliant on federal aid because they don't have control over their lands and waters. So the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission is a community organization led by tribal community leaders from the Bishop, Big Pine, and Lone Pine tribes that has been incredibly active. They have been fighting for a restoration of water rights to the Paiute, and also host events that educate and provide action items for Los Angeles residents on water independence. So one of their more recent initiatives was to purchase back 3 creeks from a private owner that would then be returned to the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission in 2023. So 95% of the valley floor land in the Owens Valley is owned by LADWP, but 5% is still privately owned. And this commission has been fundraising and organizing to buy back some of that land and return it to indigenous Paiute tribes. So,
Oops, sorry.
Oh yeah.
Really quickly, the screen seems to be a little bit cut off. Could you try
Oh
resharing
no.
it again?
Yes, I will do that. 1 second. This is my last slide, so hopefully you can see, but if not, I'm happy to share it with the audience as well. Is it okay now?
Oh, could you please make it a full screen? I think then I believe we can see whole slide.
Oh, okay. Let me try that. Actually, I think I need my notes. I'm sorry. I'm not sure that I can still see my screen, but let me try it.
Oh, you're all good.
Okay. Does that work, or it's still having the same?
Perfect.
Oh, that worked?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yes, I'm wrapping up here, but I wanted to share some links to the Owens Valley Indian Water Commission, who are still organizing and advocating for returning water rights to Native communities in Owens Valley. So some of the avenues where restoring water rights could be possible would be to demand the LADWP to develop local water sources to replace the Owens Valley supply, and to complete water rights negotiations with the city of LA that was started during the 1939 land exchange agreement, but stalled in the 1990s. The tribes can also take legal action to obtain first use rights through California water boards, but that action has currently not been put in place. And finally, the organization is mobilizing around LA County to get a ballot measure that would restore water rights to the tribes by a 2/3 vote. And a lot of that is through becoming more independent and moving to building infrastructures for recycling wastewater locally and collecting rainwater, increasing drought tolerance, and reducing LA water use overall. So they pretty much have events every month. They often have action items for LA residents to participate in terms of providing community commentary to push against LA DWP's water use, and also to kind of become more aware of how the everyday water use is impacting Indigenous communities in Owens Valley. So with these tools, I hope that students will recognize their own role in water back and land back movements, especially as California residents whose everyday consumption of water is directly connected to LA DWP's occupation and control of native waterways. This film, and I hope my teaching and writing on multi-ethnic stories and connections, shows us that it's not enough for Asian Americans to simply strive for visibility and recognition through a process of inclusion into the US nation state, but to work toward these grounded solidarities with Black, Indigenous, Palestinians, undocumented immigrants, and other people of color who are currently fighting against US militarism and settler colonial genocide. So thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amin-Hong, for this inspiring presentation. So now let's open this place to the floor. So please share any questions, comments through the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and share your questions too.
I had a quick question for you, Heidi. So you touched a little bit on your personal experiences as a visitor to the national parks. Could you describe a little bit more about how you came to this topic of learning about Indigenous solidarity and the connections with Asian American histories at national parks and land?
Sure. I have always been interested in Asian Indigenous connections and relationships throughout history. So I was actually not born in the US. I was born in China, but in a region that in Xinjiang, which is a region with a complex settler colonial history. So I came to understand my own trajectory as a migrant and my family's history as a settler colonial history, both in China and the US. So I became really interested in these transnational histories where indigeneity is linked to land and yet completely erased and requires a kind of sustained violence against Native peoples and Native lands. And then the Yosemite project kind of came out of a side project that I was working on that's a bit distinct from my other research on the Cold War. I became interested in Yosemite's militarized history because it was used as a kind of rest and recovery station during World War II. And I came across artist Bing Don's work, who was reflecting a lot on his experiences being displaced as a child of Vietnamese refugees, but doing so through this longer history of Asian American presence in California and the West Coast. So I started trying to put those puzzle pieces together, and also I wanted to kind of push back on like more moves toward inclusion that were contributing to the erasure of Native histories and struggles that continue in our present. Sorry, that was kind of a long-winded explanation, but I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. That definitely covers a lot and really shows how many intersections you're engaging with here.
I'm also I also want to ask a question. It is so impressive that you thankfully invited us to engage with the questions of pedagogy and teaching and how we can like encourage the students to be involved in this issue through learning and teaching. Could you please share a little more about kind of your reflections on teaching, like what parts students found intriguing and what were kind of like unexpected, like difficult, challenging like moments, if you had any, or what were kind of some bright achievements or something you and students like learned together after the journey, if you don't mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think teaching for me is very much an iterative process that changes every time, and is also a conversation with the students in the room. And I find that students are generally really interested in cross-ethnic and cross-racial solidarities and talking about these topics that are not traditionally included in a US educational curriculum. And one of the main challenges is just teaching students what they don't know, because these are not standardized into any high school curriculum. A lot of my work, even as a literature scholar, is teaching history. And then another challenge, I think, is that students have an instinctive idea of justice, but sometimes don't know how to apply it and how to apply their ideas to specific local events and histories. So my approach is to kind of guide students to pay attention and how for them to look for the environment at home, um, in order for them to have really specific understandings of not Asian American communities generally, or Native communities generally, but in particular, like how has Manzanar been a place that is significant to a particular group of Japanese American detainees. So those reminders to be grounded in the experiences of particular people and stories seem very helpful when teaching. But my students sometimes have these really ambitious connections that they're trying to make globally, and it can be a little hard to ring them in.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your reflections. Any other questions, comments from the audience? Oh, thanks, Tony. Um, Tony, would you mind sharing your question by yourself, or may I read it on your behalf? Thanks. So Tony's question is, thank you for this lecture today. It was really interesting. I live in Treaty 7 territory in Calgary, Canada, an hour or so from the mountains and, sorry, Kananaskis region, where the G7 summit is taking place and being very disruptive to right now. I don't have any particular questions, many thoughts, but this has made me more curious about histories of parks local to me and also about relationships between interment and indigenous land dispossession in Canada. Thank you for this time and sharing your knowledge. Thanks, Tony. Dr. Amin-Hong, would you like to share any like follow-up thoughts or comments about this comment Tony just made?
Yeah, I don't have too many follow-up comments except that I actually know very little about what's happening in Canada and Indigenous land dispossession. So I would just like to learn more. Again, this is kind of the beginning to hopefully what will become a bigger project. So I always welcome suggestions for readings I could be doing and places. And also, I guess one thought I'll share is like how much of this history is actually hidden in plain sight. So with the example that I shared with the ranger Yang Yin Chan's work, a lot of this history was just sitting in the National Park archives until she took initiatives as an intern to look at these objects that were left behind by Chinese road builders. And that kind of led to these greater collaborations with restoring Chinese American immigrant history within Yosemite. But if she had not done that work, it probably would not have resurfaced in the same way. So I'm sure there's many kind of local archives and communities that are wealths of knowledge, but their stories have not yet been amplified.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amin-Hong. Can we have one more question or comment before we wrap up today's talk? Oh, what was your favorite or most interesting thing you learned in going into this project?
Oh, that's a great question. No one has asked me that before, so thank you. When I was writing about Yosemite and Asian American art, I became really fascinated by whether the landscape could serve as an archive for Asian American histories and presence in a way that was perhaps um, less, I guess, violent as a way to not recuperate Asian masculine presence in the landscape, but actually look at how Asian American histories have been sedimented into the landscape, like in the railroad and in the roads that were built, but their labor has been kind of forgotten. So I was looking at all these artists who had taken up landscape photography as a way to kind of complicate the distinction between portrait and landscape as a commentary on how Asian American workers were backgrounded, most infamously in the Promontory Summit photo that commemorated the building of the Transcontinental Railroad that completely left out the Chinese railroad workers. Um, so I was interested in this idea that perhaps we don't need to like take these photos of like Asian American figures and put our body as visible um, main characters in the land, but could actually move toward a more interconnected relationship with the land as a kind of archive. And then just as a very concrete tidbit, I was really fascinated by Tai Sing's story as a cook for wilderness expeditions, especially because map making and geologic surveys were so crucial as a settler colonial tool to establish the national parks in the early 1900s. So to think that one of the most like skilled backcountry cooks and leaders of wilderness expeditions was a Chinese American man born in the 19th century kind of completely changed my understanding of California histories.
Thank you so much. I also see that Carolyn Wong left comment that, wow, what a powerful reminder that just your passion and curiosity can change the world and contribute to our shared liberation. I want to echo
Thank you.
I like to echo what Carolyn just said. And um, as I um, as I like listen to your presentation and talk, now I'm like newly reminded of the space landscape of the national park. And I think this is a really great inspiration. And hopefully um, I can integrate some of this conversation into the class that I would teach next year so that I can invite like more students to think of this topic in a different way, thanks to your scholarship.
Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for taking time off on a Friday to join us at this talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your inspiring, fabulous talk today, Dr. Amin-Hong. And thank you all for being here with us today. And again, all the recordings and upcoming speaker series information will be posted through our Instagram and newsletter. So please stay connected. Thank you all, and hopefully we will see you next time.